Welcome to the complete Leopard Gecko care guide. Today we're going to go in depth of every part of reptile husbandry that I think you need to know to care for leopard geckos. The things I'm going to be telling you are stuff based on my research and experience over the past 4 years. I guess I've cared for over a dozen leopard geckos now, and they've all done wonderfully, so I am confident that everything I will be giving you today should be helpful. Of course, there's more than one way to care for any reptile, so remember to do more research, find other resources, but I'm going to tell you everything that I know about them and how to keep them happy and healthy. Before we get started, GoHerpy now has more merchandise on the shop. No Leopard Gecko merchandise right now, but if you keep following, maybe there will be some in the future. There's a few designs over there, so you can check that out. Also at goherping.com/leopardgeckos, you can find a complete updated care guide of everything that I'll be talking about in this video, so you can follow along by reading, or it can just be a great resource to go back to if you have a certain question about a specific type of husbandry. Finally, last thing before we get started, all the supplies that I use to care for my leopard geckos are linked down in the kit below. Everything's just laid out. You can buy it directly on Amazon. You can buy it all at once if you want, or just select different items you want to use. So if you go to kit.com/goherping or the link below, you can find everything that I use. And I personally get a commission every time you purchase something on that list, so it's a great way to help out. So now we can get started in the care. Into the care. First off, let's go ahead and get into the enclosure. Size-wise, there is a lot of arguments over this and everything that I'll be talking about in this video, but size is the very first thing. A single leopard gecko, some people will say, can be fine in a 10-gallon. Some say a 15, some say a 20, some say larger. Personally, I suggest using a 20-gallon or larger for a single leopard gecko. So giving them space to explore is very beneficial, along with the fact that you're going to want a temperature gradient in the enclosure. We'll get to this later once we get to the temperature stuff, so I think that giving them this extra space to move around and explore is pretty beneficial, along with the fact that you're going to want a temperature gradient in your enclosure. This means that they can basically choose what temperature they're going to be because they are ectothermic or cold-blooded, so you want to give them the option to actually be warmer or cooler since they can't regulate that with their body, but we're going to get to that with temperature later. But having more space means that there can be more options as to what temperature your animal wants to be at. Now, what about housing multiple geckos together and how much space would they need? Well, I recently did a video on housing leopard geckos together. I have done it with 2 or 3 pairs of female geckos. Let's go ahead and get this out of the way. Male geckos will probably fight to the death. A male and female will probably have eggs, which maybe that's what you're into. If you want to breed geckos, this is not the video for you. You'll need to find actual gecko breeders. And 2 females together sometimes might do okay, but like I said, it's very iffy. There's a lot of different things to it, so I suggest you go watch that full video I did on whether you can house them together. Short answer is technically maybe, but it's best not to. And then if you do still really want to house them together, 20 gallons will be pretty tight for 2 animals. You can use glass, wood, plastic, or whatever kind of enclosure you want. As you can see, I tend to prefer glass, but other types do work. These do change different variables when it comes to the actual husbandry and setting up the right temperatures and humidity in your enclosure. So basically, I won't even argue about it. Just use what you want as long as it's the right size. They all work perfectly fine as long as they're set up correctly. Let's go ahead and hop into substrate. This is probably known as the most debatable topic when it comes to leopard geckos. You'll often see or hear about sand. I'm sure this is something you've heard of if you've looked into leopard geckos kind of at all. Should you use sand? Can you use sand? Will it kill them? How quickly will it kill them? There's a lot of stuff about it. Right off the bat, I have used sand once. I highly regret it. That was not fun. And luckily, I removed it before anything kind of serious happened. Leopard geckos do not live on sand in the wild. They're from places like Afghanistan. It's rocky. And I'm sure obviously there is going to be dry types of soil around, probably with some sand mixed in. Let's go ahead and get this out of the way. If you think that a leopard gecko lives 100% completely on sand in the wild, you're wrong. To say that they don't ever interact with sand naturally is also pretty wrong, because of course there's going to be a lot of variation and they live across a pretty vast landscape. However, just because something is natural doesn't always mean it's going to be best. I say this a lot, but there are reasons that animals' lifespans are longer in captivity than in the wild in most cases. Of course, there's certain species where their husbandry just has not been perfected, or if they just can't live in captivity, like I don't know, orcas or something. I don't know about sea life, don't ask me. Long story short, leopard geckos are pretty much always going to live longer in captivity because you can take away those dangers. Why is sand dangerous according to some people? Myself included. That's because there's a thing called impaction, which in animals is essentially when their gut just gets filled with stuff that they either can't digest or can't pass when they consume it. The reason not all substrates cause impaction are because many are not loose substrates. A loose substrate is something that is, loose, like dirt or sand or gravel or whatever, because it's loose. I don't know how else to say it. And then non-loose substrates are things like paper towel, reptile carpets, tile, newspaper, things like that. So I always use non-loose substrates, but we'll get to some loose substrates in just a minute. But anyway, back to impaction. Loose substrate can be ingested by animals. Leopard geckos specifically, they just lick everything. That's how they sense stuff. So they're just always going to be licking, and every so often they might pick up a couple pieces of sand. If they're fed directly on the substrate, like you just toss an insect in and they eat it off the substrate, there's a pretty decent chance they're going to get a mouthful of substrate with that. Even if you do feed in a bowl, they do still lick a lot of stuff. You might say I'm being overprotective, but why not be? Sand isn't that amazing. If it was some ridiculously amazing, this is 10 times better than anything else, then I might consider taking that risk. But I don't really see the reason for that when there's so many other really good options that you can use. And the reason that some loose substrates work while sand does not is sand is made from quartz or rock, and that takes a long time for the body to digest. The stomach acids can eventually break that down, but it takes a long time, so this means that it often builds up in the animal before they can pass it or digest it. That's why things like maybe coconut fiber, if an animal ingests some of that, it's soft, it's just a type of dirt, and it's pretty easy to break down and pass. It doesn't get clogged or stuck in the animal. Ideally, you don't want them to eat any substrate, but that's why sand and things like walnut shells tend to be on the top of what you should not use. People also argue you can use sand 100% just fine if your husbandry is perfect, because you will have no problems. The thing I don't understand about this argument is, just personally, I've gotten so many really depressing emails and pictures of people's dead animals. Why did they die? They get an autopsy, they check it themselves, or whatever. Turns out their gut was filled with sand and they were impacted. They could not ingest any food, they were getting no nutrition, they just basically died. And let's say your husbandry has to be 100% perfect, whatever that is, in order for it to actually ingest sand. If an animal's husbandry can be 90% perfect and everything is fine, except for the fact that it can't pass sand, then is it still really worth taking that risk with sand? For one, you can't tell if an animal is impacted, either until it's really bad or until it's essentially too late. You might be able to do a surgery. For one, these are very tiny animals. It's very hard to do that kind of thing. But most of the time, once you can see that their gut is just completely filled, it's kind of just well, it might die. I've done a video on impaction. It was really old though, so I might do an updated one. That's the best little summary I can do to just say I personally suggest you don't use sand with your leopard geckos. What should you use? Well, like I said, I like using non-loose substrates. So stuff like, I generally use reptile carpet. The thing with reptile carpet is it can be a little more difficult to clean. Paper towel is nicer just because you can pull all the sheets out, put new sheets in, and it's all clean. But paper towel is just kind of ugly. It does the job, it works perfectly, you can feel free to use that. I still use it with temporary leopard geckos because it is just easy and efficient. But reptile carpet does look nicer, and it can be washed. Sometimes I just wash it just with water if there's only a little bit of stuff on it, and then occasionally you can throw it in the wash, throw it in the dishwasher. Some people say that fibers will come off and your gecko will eat those. I've used reptile carpet for about 4 years and I have not seen any fibers on the brands that I've used that come out at least. Other people say that their claws will get stuck in it and get torn out. The shortest thing I can say is I've never had this happen, and I guess anything's possible. There are these little things, but personally I do feel comfortable using that. If you don't, you can go with newspaper or paper towel. And although I don't like using loose substrates with leopard geckos, dry coconut fiber is a pretty common option for them. You can get this as Eco Earth from ZooMed or plantation soil from Exoterra. The only thing about this is because you want to use it while it's dry, it tends to get dusty in my experience, and I do sometimes have the worry that dry animals will end up inhaling a lot of this dust. Again, am I being overprotective? Maybe, but that's how I roll. But I do love using Eco Earth and other coconut fibers with animals that need higher humidity, because it works wonderfully when it is moist. But leopard geckos come from dry areas, and having a moist substrate can cause issues, which we'll get to soon. That was a long substrate segment, but hopefully that helps out. Let's go ahead and get into hiding places for your animal. Hides are basically a necessity for just about every reptile out there, at least a lot of the common species. And the reasoning for this is so that they can stay hidden and feel safe and feel secure, and they're not just out in the open all the time. How many hides or hiding places should you have? Well, the very first thing that I tend to say is it doesn't necessarily have to be some like reptile hide. Like, you don't have to buy it from the store and it says reptile hide on it. There's lots of different ways you can make hiding places for your animal, whether it's using plants, live or fake, different pieces of whatever decor that they can hide under, hide around, get themselves kind of into, whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to be a true like real hide. I use fake plants a lot for this. But of course that is the easiest and most effective way to really make it nice and dark in there for them so they feel super comfy. How many hides do you use? Well, for one gecko, the general rule is to use 3 hides because you want one on the warm side of their enclosure, one on the cooler side of their enclosure, which again we'll get to temperature soon, and one called a humid hide or a moist hide, or whatever you want to call it. This hide makes it easier for your gecko to shed off its skin because, if you don't know, reptiles shed their skin just all in one piece, like people do. I'm kind of shedding right now, I guess, because we all are. But geckos, like other reptiles, do it all in one piece, and when it's more humid in a certain area, it loosens up the skin, it's not as crackly and dry, and it just peels off more easily. So you can make it easier for your gecko to do this by creating a humid hide. Personally, I just take a plastic Tupperware, cut a hole in it, make sure to sand it down or melt it or something so that it's not sharp around the edges, and put something like paper towel, or you can use coconut fiber. It gets everywhere, so I like using paper towel, and I just spray it down every couple days to keep it moist in there. Can I just like put a moist hide in there when my gecko is shedding? That's a somewhat common question. The problem is leopard geckos go into shed so quickly that you often can't even tell. Like 1 hour, they'll look perfectly normal. An hour later, they'll be all like dull and look like they're about to shed. And then a couple hours later, it comes off. So this might all happen in the middle of the night. You might never see your gecko shed. They also eat it because they reabsorb the nutrients from that shed. It's weird, I know, they're just eating their dead skin. But it works, it's efficient, it's effective. That's why you're never gonna see shed in your enclosure. There might be little bits that they missed, and stuck shed is a thing that can happen in geckos. But hides, make as many hiding places as you want. Just try and make sure your gecko can stay comfortable on the cool side, comfortable on the warm side, and have a place to go to that is more humid to make it easy to shed. Hopefully that covers it well. Next up, water. This is pretty quick, but something that goes in your enclosure. Put a water bowl in there. They might want to drink. They can go a long time without moisture because they are from very dry areas, but keeping a water bowl filled with nice, fresh, clean water as often as possible is great. You can change it out daily, multiple times a week, multiple times a day if you want. The more the better. That's a lot of water, but it works. Tap water is something I don't suggest you use because it has chemicals like chlorine, chloramine, and ammonia if you're using city water. Well water depends on what you or your family or your neighborhood puts in it, but I did a whole video talking about all the types of water. Short answer is I have found that ReptiSafe is the most effective. You just add some drops in and it's done. But if you really want to be a bit cheaper and not spend money on ReptiSafe, there are home remedies you can do to make your water safe. Again, you can watch that video with the iCard below, or the link below. iCard above, link below. Next up, to temperature and humidity. First, let's go over temperatures. Short answer is I keep my geckos at about a 90 to 94 degree hotspot, usually just around like 91. If it's 1 degree off, who cares? It's good to be like accurate, but they're not gonna notice. But around 90 is the general consensus in the community as to what works best based on their natural habitat and just with breeders and keepers and stuff. How should you heat your leopard gecko up? Some people use heat lamps, some use under tank heaters. I highly suggest you use an under tank heater. This is because they are not basking animals, so the quickest and easiest and the most comfortable way to get that heat into your animal is when the animal can just lie down, get their belly on some heat, and it's a nice, well, it's a heat pad. That's what it does. It heats their belly up. Make sure you use a thermostat with these. Although technically I do get by without using a thermostat with a couple of my animals. It's much harder, it's much more complicated, and you can say it's riskier. I'd link some thermostats down below. They range from like $20 to $50. But what the thermostat does is you can just set it at a temperature and it does the rest for you. You plug the heat mat into the thermostat, you put a probe of the thermostat beneath the enclosure where you want the temperature to be right, and you just set the thermostat to what you want. Now what I do is I put this to one side of the enclosure. There's lots of different sizes of heat mats. Some people say you should have a heat mat that is half the size of the enclosure. That's pretty big. Usually I go with 1/4 to 1/3 of the enclosure. Usually 1/3 is best, but because leopard geckos are smaller, it's pretty easy to get an area that can cover their entire body. And then as the enclosure goes down, as the gecko walks across the enclosure, ideally it's going to get cooler. The cool side, there's no like exact numbers for this. Usually I just make sure it goes down to at least 80 degrees. It could go cooler because if they can get to that warm spot, then it doesn't matter too much. But about 80, maybe 75, that's a bit lower, but that works, just so that your gecko doesn't overheat. At night, personally, I just leave my heat mats on 24/7 because they do have the cooler spaces they can go to. If you want, you can turn the heat mats off at night, whether it's because you want to save electricity or I don't know why else. But if you do want to do that, that can also drop to about 80, maybe lower. They can like survive in 70 degrees. They'd probably not enjoy it very much. I would not want to do that for very long, but just somewhere around the 80 to 90 degree area at night on the warm side of the enclosure. And then in the middle, of course, it'll just be like a random gradient. Like, oh, it's 84 degrees here and it's 81 degrees here. But your gecko can figure it out from there as long as it has the options. Humidity is quite easy to deal with because they are from pretty dry areas. Usually, the average household is going to be just fine for it, but essentially just keeping this nice and low will be ideal. Dehumidifying an area can be a bit more difficult than actually adding humidity, but it can be done. Often the heating just naturally decreases the humidity, it dries it up. But if your humidity is too high, the exact number varies a lot. Personally, I would not feel comfortable with a leopard gecko over like 50%, 60%. If it was over 60%, then I would be pretty concerned. And at that point, they can have things like respiratory issues or other illnesses. Their scales or their skin may be affected because it's just so damp in there. It's like if you like wore shoes that were wet all the time, your feet are not gonna be very healthy after a while. It's that kind of thing. Just keep it lower. It doesn't have to be very exact. And then the humidity hide is the place that your animal can go when it does need that dose of humidity, that dose of moisture. And of course, there will be a water bowl in there. If your gecko is soaking in the water bowl frequently, this probably means that your temperatures are way too high in the enclosure and it's trying to cool off. In snakes and stuff, soaking also means mites. Personally, I haven't dealt with geckos having mites, so I can't vouch for this personally, but that is another possibility. The animal is trying to soothe the itchiness of the mites or drown the mites or whatever. Mites are not very common with leopard geckos, but it's still something good to know about. Just don't panic about it. It really doesn't need to be on the front of your mind. Next up, let's go to lighting your enclosure. Do you need light? What kind of light? Lights, do you use them? Well, personally, I kind of just have lights all over the room, so that it's generally pretty bright in here during the day. And one, this makes it nice for videos, it makes it nice for me to look at, and it makes it so that animals actually know it's daytime. So leopard geckos are crepuscular animals, meaning that they are active during dawn and dusk hours of the day. Lots of people mix this up with nocturnal. It's important that they know when it is daytime so that they're not living in the dark 24/7. Why do so many people do that? I don't know. They keep their gecko like in the closet. It's dark all the time. They love it, right? I don't want to be in the sun all the time. That'd be so annoying. I would just freak out. I'd have like a mental breakdown if it was never dark. I guess like Alaskans can deal with that in certain areas, but I don't want to, and neither does your gecko. Give us some daytime, give us some nighttime. A direct lamp is not necessarily required if you have a heat mat under there. Even just, there's a window right here. Indirect window light is often enough. Direct window light might heat your enclosure up, so I wouldn't suggest that. I usually keep animals right by the window. I just have to make sure the pattern of the sun does not shine right into the animal, because once it hits the glass, it's gonna heat up and turn into like an oven. Now, what type of light should you use? So many details, I know. There's lots of different lights. There's just random incandescents, LEDs, pretty much any of that works. UVB is a little bit different. I'll get to that in just a second. But red lights, that's a very common option. Animals can't see them, right? No, they can see them. They just might not always see the color. I don't know why they exist, honestly. I mean, they work for heat, usually. But why does it have to be red? They can see it. It's sometimes just a little dimmer. Keeping a red light on at night is a big ol' no-no in my book, because that's kind of the equivalent to it like always being bright. That goes for any animal, by the way. Now, I guess you could use a red light during the day if you really wanted to. Some people have told me that red lights will eventually damage your animal's eyesight. I personally haven't seen proof for this yet. I've only looked into it a little bit. So is a red light actually dangerous? It's hard to say, it's another debate. I haven't had bad luck with it, but I also don't often use red lights. UVB is the other thing. A lot of people say that I would never keep any animal without UVB. So crepuscular animals, like I said before, are active during the dawn and dusk hours. Now during these hours, it's been shown that UVB rays from the sun are really pretty non-existent. They're very dull, and there's really not much that you can actually benefit from the sun during these hours. This means that leopard geckos naturally do not really get any UVB out in the wild, since they will be hidden away and sleeping during the day. So UVB is not something I would consider a requirement. The other thing though is that many people say albino animals are damaged by UVB because their skin is much more delicate and sensitive, and the UVB can do more harm than good. There's not a ton of research on this yet, but until it is, I just say don't use UVB on albino leopard geckos. It gets even spicier when you get into the world of animals that are albino but still do need UVB, but we won't get into that today. Now let's go ahead into food. What should your gecko eat, how often, and what should you supplement it with? They are 100% insectivores, no veggies, no fruit, no meat. Just stick to insects, please. There are crickets, mealworms, dubias, superworms, other types of roaches, other types of worms, waxworms, hornworms, calciworms. There's a lot of options. The 4 most common that are fed to leopard geckos are crickets, mealworms, superworms, and dubia roaches. Now, leopard geckos are a pretty weird species because they often just decide that they don't like a food anymore. For example, Goldie, my leopard gecko, 4 years ago when I got him, he was being fed superworms by the breeder. All of a sudden he's like, nah, I don't want superworms. So I had to start trying a bunch of other insects, and he started eating mealworms? Maybe it was crickets. And then eventually he was like, I don't really want crickets. And then he switched to mealworms. And oftentimes they will just eat lots of different stuff. We've had some of the weirdest, pickiest geckos ever. There was one that would eat nothing but superworms, and we just started buying every insect on Earth, and finally superworms was the thing that it took. So basically what I'm trying to say is, although I'm about to suggest the insects that I prefer, your gecko might not agree, and you're just gonna have to go with what it wants. I used to feed just mealworms, but dubias are often considered the healthiest, and even if they aren't the healthiest, they tend to be the softest. Like, you can just tell that they're softer and easier to digest. Unfortunately, I've had bearded dragons and leopard geckos that just can't digest the hard shells of mealworms or superworms, and it'll just come straight out in their poop undigested, and that just doesn't seem okay with me. But dubias are consistently giving the animals some nice, solid, but soft poops. I know you wanted to know that. I mean, it's important for them to poop well, and dubias seem to be the best way to do that. A lot of you are gonna say, but I live in Florida, or I live in Canada, where dubias are illegal, so sorry about that. Luckily, there are plenty of other options. I've avoided crickets for like 4 years now because they're just the worst. They stink, they're loud, they escape. I kill them really easily. But they do work. I can't hate on them too much because they do keep animals alive. I still hate them though, but I mean, it's just like a personal grudge. It's fine, they're healthy, they'll keep your animal doing well. But dubias are my insect of choice. And a variety is always good to have. You can get lots of other types to just occasionally give them. The only thing about variety is your animal might refuse them, but it doesn't hurt to try it. Next up is supplements. There are 3 different types of supplements known to use with leopard geckos. There's calcium with D3, calcium without D3, and a multivitamin supplement. I don't super understand the breakdown of like each little component in these, so I'll just tell you what I do and what's been working based on all my research. And when I dust my insects, I dust it with multivitamin and calcium with D3. The ratio I do is about a quarter multivitamin to a third multivitamin, with the rest being the calcium with D3. So usually I just do 1/3 multivitamin, 2/3 calcium with D3. You can mix this all up. I just have like a little container with that mixture already done, or you can just do it like every 3rd feeding, you give them multivitamin instead of calcium. Leopard geckos are actually pretty good at knowing when they need more or less calcium. So what people often do is put a little bowl of calcium in the enclosure. This bowl is calcium without D3. Why? I would try to explain it, but it's better if you just refer to other people for that because I'd just be copying what they said. But it works just fine. I'm happy and comfortable doing that. Overdosing with calcium is something we very often see. About half the animals, or half the leopard geckos we've gotten in here, you will usually have calcium overdoses. You can tell because there would be these big squishy packets in their armpits. Like literally you can squish them and it's just like a big old lumpy bubble. This means that you're feeding your animal too much calcium. All you have to do is bring it back, maybe take that calcium out, put less in their food, and over a couple weeks to a couple months, usually just a few weeks works for us, of no calcium at all, and it'll be back to normal. Then just start feeding them with less calcium than you were before, and that should be fine. If they have like big squishy packets for just a little bit, that should be fine, but in the long run, it's good to avoid it so that their calcium overdose does not end up causing something more severe in the gecko. How often you should feed is very hard to say because every gecko is different. The tail of your gecko is the best gauge as to how fat or thin they are. You want a nice, chunky, meaty tail, but you don't want other parts of their body to start looking too flabby themselves. And then a thinner tail, if it's looking like a crested gecko tail, you're having some problems. It's really depressing seeing those. It needs to be nice and fat. Again, without their rest of their body showing it. So like if they have flabs around here, or up here, or around their neck, then maybe you're feeding them too much. Their tail is where they keep their fat reserves, so like if they end up starving, they can live a long time just off of what's inside their tail. But personally, I essentially free feed my Goldie, my leopard gecko dubias. They're pretty much always in his bowl, and he doesn't like eat himself to death. He's not a fish or anything. However, sometimes you might have to actually regulate it, whether it's like a couple dubias every couple days, a lot of dubias twice a week, or whatever. There's lots of ways to do it, and it's hard to tell you exactly what you should do, especially since it is based on the insect. But when I get a new gecko and I'm not sure how much to feed it, I kind of just watch it and see how much it eats every day, and then take out what it doesn't eat just so that I can keep track. And if it's getting too fat, I reduce it. If it's not gaining enough, I might just keep the food in there, or change to a slightly fattier insect. Leopard geckos are often known to be pretty docile, pretty good with handling. Some are often more scared, especially if they haven't been handled in the past, and others are just perfectly fine with it from the start. We've had cute little geckos that have come in from like horrid conditions, and immediately they just crawl all over you, and it's so cute. Don't be discouraged if your gecko does not do this. If you work with it frequently, maybe a few minutes of your day, or a few times a week for like 10 or 15 minutes, just getting it used to handling will help. If the gecko starts getting scared, don't just immediately put it back, because if it knows that if it can just defend itself and get away, then it'll just keep doing it. Just keep handling it, just show it that it's okay. Leopard geckos do bite. It's not common. It surprisingly hurts a little more than you might think, but in the end it's really like you're basically not ever gonna draw blood. It's not gonna break your bone or anything. It's just gonna be a nice pinch on the finger or wherever they bite you. But don't let the fear or discouragement of a bite stop you from handling it. Just keep working with it a little bit at a time. Right when you get your gecko, it's best to give it a few days to actually adjust to the new home. It might be good to make sure it starts eating before you do it, because there can be a lot of stress when it's in a new place. But in the end, they're often a great animal that you can play around with and handle and get cute pictures with. Don't forget that they can drop their tails. Like I said, this is their fat reserve. It's very important. We've had geckos that drop tails, and it grows back surprisingly quickly in a number of weeks, but it can be a bit more risky during this. You have to be really on top of things because they might not have as much nutrition at that time. Don't worry about it. I've never had a gecko drop its tail when I've been caring for it, and I have over the years accidentally pulled at their tails or whatever. Avoid that as much as you can, but most of the time you should be all good. Worst case scenario, they do drop their tail, and it'll need a little more attention here and there. But don't let that stop you from getting a gecko. So there we go. I'm pretty sure I covered everything. I'm gonna be editing this and realize like, I forgot that thing I wanted to say. But that's why you can go and check out the Leopard Gecko Care Guide at goherping.com/leopardgeckos, because I update that super frequently. Again, all the supplies I use is linked below. I co-own a company called Emerald Scales that sells animals, so you can check that out. It's still generally small, so we might not have any leopard geckos at the time, but you can follow Emerald Scales on Instagram and keep up to see what's new. Again, merchandise, we've got frogs and snakes right now, maybe more to come. You can check that out at goherping.com/shop. Hopefully this helped you. On the channel, I do lots of care guides and other reptile stuff. If you're still watching, then cool, you're like a dedicated researcher, and I appreciate that. Again, don't forget to Google some other things to compare sources and stuff to make sure I didn't mess anything up. Hopefully that helped. Feel free to ask questions, join the Discord or Facebook if you want more help. I am plugging a lot of stuff right now, but I think that's everything. So I'm Alex, and thanks for watching.